This attunement to timing often manifests as an uncanny ability to know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to act and when to wait. Others marvel at their capacity to enter conversations at precisely the moment when their particular insight is most needed, or to withdraw just before a situation turns volatile. This is not strategic calculation but organic responsiveness, the natural result of living in harmony with the deeper rhythms that govern all manifestation. The oracle's knowing often arrives clothed in symbols and metaphors rather than linear propositions. Dreams become important teachers, synchronicities reveal hidden patterns, and the symbolic language of the unconscious provides a richer vocabulary for understanding than the purely conceptual constructs of rational thought. This symbolic literacy allows the oracle to read the signs that others miss, to perceive in the ordinary events of daily life the extraordinary communications of the deeper psyche. Jung's concept of enantiodromia finds perfect expression in the oracle's paradoxical nature. Their greatest strength, this profound attunement to unconscious wisdom, could easily become their greatest weakness, if pursued to an extreme. The shadow of the oracle is the inflation that comes from identifying too completely with this special knowing, forgetting that they are merely a vessel for wisdom, rather than its source. The truly mature oracle maintains a humble relationship with their gift, recognizing themselves as a servant of the greater wisdom, rather than its master. This humility manifests as a peculiar kind of confidence, not the brittle certainty of the ego defending its positions, but the fluid assurance of one who knows they are connected to something larger than themselves. They can afford to be wrong about particulars, because they trust the larger process of which they are a part. This paradoxical combination of certainty and flexibility often baffles those accustomed to more rigid forms of authority. The oracle's dominance emerges not from the suppression of others' wisdom, but from its activation. Their insights have the quality of revelation, in the truest sense. They unveil what was already present, but hidden, like sunlight burning away the morning mist to reveal the landscape that was always there. Others defer to this revelatory power, not because they are being controlled, but because they are being reminded of what they themselves, in their deepest knowing, have always understood. This is perhaps why the oracle's influence often increases over time rather than diminishing. Unlike charismatic authority, which tends to fade as the novelty wears off, or rational authority, which must constantly prove itself through new achievements, oracular authority deepens through consistent demonstration of its connection to lasting truths. Each fulfilled prediction, each insight that proves itself through unfolding events, each moment of guidance that leads to genuine resolution, adds another layer to the oracle's credibility. Yet the oracle's relationship with their own knowing remains mysteriously provisional. They cannot summon insight at will like a skill that has been mastered, nor can they fully explain the source of their understanding. This uncertainty keeps them connected to the mystery from which their wisdom flows, preventing the kind of intellectual possession that would cut them off from their deeper source. The oracle dwells perpetually at the threshold between the known and unknown, the conscious and unconscious, the personal and transpersonal. This liminal position requires a special kind of psychological strength, the ability to hold uncertainty without anxiety, to remain open to the unprecedented while maintaining enough stability to function effectively in the world of forms and structures. In practical terms, this oracular quality manifests in countless subtle ways. The quietly dominant oracle seems to know intuitively which projects will succeed and which will fail, which relationships carry the seeds of growth, and which are destined for disappointment. They can sense the hidden motivations that drive surface behaviors, perceive the unexpressed needs that shape group dynamics, and anticipate the consequences of decisions before they fully unfold. This prescient quality creates a peculiar form of temporal dominance. While others are caught in the immediate pressures of the present moment, the oracle moves through time with the confidence of one who has glimpsed the larger pattern. They make decisions based not only on current circumstances, but on intuited futures, positioning themselves and others for developments that have not yet manifested, but are already implicit in the present configuration. The oracle's knowing often extends beyond the purely personal realm into collective and archetypal territories. They may sense the mood of a group before it becomes conscious to the group itself, anticipate cultural shifts before they become visible to sociologists, or perceive in individual symptoms the signs of broader psychological epidemics. This capacity to read the collective unconscious gives their insights a prophetic quality that can be both compelling and unsettling to others. Yet perhaps the most profound aspect of oracular dominance lies in its capacity to midwife the birth of consciousness in others. The oracle's insights have the power to illuminate not just external situations but internal realities, helping others recognize aspects of themselves that were previously unconscious. This revelatory function transforms the oracle from mere predictor to psychological catalyst, someone whose very presence accelerates the processes of individuation and self-understanding. The authority that flows from this psychological midwifery is perhaps the most genuine form of dominance available to human consciousness. It is not based on the suppression of others' agency, but on its activation, not on the diminishment of others' wisdom, but on its awakening. When the oracle speaks, they are not imposing their truth upon others, but helping others discover their own truth, not controlling their destiny, but illuminating their capacity for self-determination. This revelatory power requires the oracle to maintain a careful balance between disclosure and discretion. Not all truths are ready to be spoken. Not all insights can be safely shared. Not all revelations will be welcomed by those who most need to hear them. The mature oracle develops an exquisite sensitivity to what the moment can bear, knowing when to speak fully, when to speak partially, and when to remain silent while holding the truth in loving patience. The oracle's silence can be as powerful as their speech, creating a pregnant emptiness into which others' own knowing can emerge. They understand that sometimes the most profound gift they can offer is not their insight, but their presence, a quality of receptive attention that creates space for others to contact their own oracular depths. In the end, the oracle's quiet dominance rests not on their possession of special knowledge, but on their willingness to serve as a transparent vessel for wisdom that belongs to no one and everyone. They have learned to step aside from their own ego's agenda sufficiently to allow something larger to move through them, and in this stepping aside, they paradoxically achieve a form of influence that the grasping ego could never attain. This is the great mystery of oracular authority, that it increases in direct proportion to the oracle's willingness to surrender personal credit for their insights. The more completely they recognize themselves as servants of a wisdom greater than their individual understanding, the more powerfully that wisdom flows through them, and the more naturally others are drawn to drink from the spring of insight that bubbles up through their being. The oracle's dominance is thus simultaneously the most selfless and the most self-fulfilling form of power, a paradox that reflects the deeper paradoxes of consciousness itself. In learning to trust the wisdom that flows through them rather than the knowledge they possess, they discover a form of authority that is both absolutely personal and completely transpersonal, rooted in their unique being, yet connected to the universal wellspring from which all genuine insight flows. Through this oracular knowing, the quietly dominant touch something eternal within the temporal, something infinite within the finite boundaries of human existence. They become bridges between the world of everyday consciousness and the deeper realms where wisdom dwells in patient silence, waiting to be called forth by those brave enough to trust what they cannot fully understand. In this bridging function, they find not only their own deepest fulfillment, but their greatest gift to a world hungry for the guidance that can only come from beyond the limitations of purely rational understanding. In the deepest chambers of the human psyche, carved into the bedrock of collective memory by countless generations of lived experience, there dwells an archetype so ancient and powerful that its mere stirring can reshape the landscape of human relationships. This is the archetype of the sovereign, not the tyrant drunk on power's crude intoxications, but the true king or queen, whose authority flows from service to something infinitely greater than the small concerns of personal ego. Some souls arrive in this world carrying this archetypal pattern like a golden thread woven into the very fabric of their being. They do not choose to become leaders in the way one might choose a profession or a hobby. Instead, leadership chooses them, flowing through their nature as naturally as water flows downhill, as inevitably as dawn breaks over the eastern horizon. They discover their destiny not through ambition's fevered pursuit, but through the gradual recognition of what they have always been. This is perhaps the most mysterious aspect of archetypal leadership, its quality of recognition rather than achievement. Others sense in these natural sovereigns something that transcends the boundaries of individual personality, something that speaks to the deepest organizing principles of human consciousness. It is as if they carry within their being an echo of some primordial order, a remembrance of how authority was meant to function before it became corrupted by ego's desperate hungers. Jung understood that archetypes are not merely abstract patterns, but living forces that seek manifestation through human consciousness. The sovereign archetype carries within itself the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who have grappled with the fundamental challenges of leadership: how to hold the center when chaos threatens, how to make decisions that serve the greater good when personal preferences pull in different directions, how to bear the weight of collective responsibility without being crushed by its immensity. When this archetype awakens within a human soul, it brings with it both tremendous gifts and equally tremendous burdens. The natural sovereign finds themselves drawn inexorably toward positions of responsibility, not from any conscious seeking but from an inner compulsion as powerful as gravity itself. They cannot help but notice when groups lack direction, when organizations drift without purpose, when communities fragment for want of a unifying center, and in noticing they feel the stirring of an ancient obligation that predates their personal existence. This gravitational pull toward leadership manifests in countless subtle ways. In meetings, others naturally turn to them for guidance, even when they hold no official authority. In crises, people instinctively look to them for reassurance and direction. In moments of collective uncertainty, they find themselves speaking words that somehow capture what everyone has been feeling but could not articulate. This is not manipulation or strategic positioning, but the natural flowering of an archetypal pattern that seeks expression through their being. The burden of such recognition can be overwhelming, particularly for those who have not yet learned to distinguish between the personal ego that would shrink from responsibility and the transpersonal self that accepts it as necessary service. Many who carry this sovereign archetype experience what Jung would recognize as a profound tension between their conscious desire for a simple private life and their unconscious destiny as holders of collective space. Yet, this very tension, when properly understood and integrated, becomes the source of their authentic authority. The reluctant sovereign who accepts leadership not from ego's grandiose fantasies, but from humble recognition of necessity, carries a power that voluntary seekers of authority can never attain. Their reluctance itself becomes a kind of credential, proof that they serve something larger than personal ambition. This archetypal authority manifests most clearly in moments of collective crisis or transition, when familiar structures crumble and established hierarchies lose their legitimacy. The natural sovereign emerges like a mountain peak revealed when the clouds lift. They do not seize power, but find it flowing toward them from those who recognize in their steadiness the stability that the moment requires. Their leadership in such times feels not like domination, but like salvation, not like the imposition of foreign will, but like the restoration of natural order. The sovereign archetype carries within itself an inherent understanding of what Jung called a transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative tension until a third way emerges. Natural leaders often excel at finding solutions that honor the legitimate needs of conflicting parties, not through compromise that satisfies no one, but through synthesis that transforms the terms of the conflict itself. They can see the larger pattern within which apparent contradictions resolve into complementary aspects of a greater whole. This synthetic capacity extends beyond problem-solving into the realm of vision. The natural sovereign possesses an intuitive understanding of what Jung termed the telos, the inherent direction or purpose toward which any system naturally wants to evolve. They can perceive not only what is but what wants to become, and their leadership often takes the form of midwifing this natural becoming rather than imposing artificial goals from without. Yet, the sovereign archetype contains within itself a profound paradox that distinguishes authentic leadership from its shadow manifestations. True sovereignty requires the complete surrender of personal sovereignty. The archetypal king or queen must sacrifice their individual desires on the altar of collective need, becoming in the deepest sense a servant of the very people over whom they exercise authority. This paradox that ultimate power requires ultimate surrender lies at the heart of all genuine leadership. This sacrificial dimension of sovereignty often remains hidden from external observers who see only the privileges and perquisites of leadership, while missing its deeper costs. The natural sovereign carries within their being the collective concerns of all those for whom they are responsible. They lose the luxury of purely personal concerns, the freedom to act solely from individual preference. Every decision must be weighed against its impact on the greater whole, every personal desire filtered through the needs of those they serve. Jung recognized this sacrificial aspect of archetypal leadership in his studies of ancient kingship rituals, where the monarch was often understood to embody the fertility and well-being of the entire realm. The king's personal vitality was inseparable from the land's prosperity, the queen's wisdom from the people's guidance. This mystical identification between leader and led continues to operate in the depths of the collective unconscious, creating an invisible bond between natural sovereigns and those who recognize their authority. The emergence of archetypal leadership in contemporary contexts often puzzles those accustomed to more transactional forms of authority. The natural sovereign may hold no official title, command no institutional resources, possess no obvious qualifications for leadership beyond the mysterious quality of their being. Yet others defer to them instinctively, seeking their counsel in times of difficulty, looking to them for the kind of guidance that transcends mere expertise or experience. This deference is not the result of coercion or manipulation, but of recognition, the deep acknowledgement of something in the natural sovereign that resonates with the archetypal patterns embedded in the collective unconscious. It is as if they carry within themselves a key that unlocks something in others, awakening dormant capacities for trust, cooperation, and collective purpose that remain inaccessible to more conventional forms of leadership. The sovereign archetype expresses itself differently through different temperaments and in different circumstances, but certain qualities appear with remarkable consistency. Natural leaders possess an unusual capacity for psychological containment. They can hold space for intense emotions, difficult conversations, and complex dynamics without being overwhelmed or reactive. This containment creates a field of safety within which others can explore their own authentic responses to challenging situations. They also demonstrate what might be called moral imagination, the ability to envision possibilities for collective action that transcend the limitations of current circumstances. While others see only problems, the natural sovereign perceives potential solutions. While others focus on constraints, they recognize opportunities. This visionary capacity inspires others, not through false optimism, but through the authentic conviction that emerges from genuine contact with archetypal potential. Perhaps most significantly, natural sovereigns possess an instinctive understanding of what Jung called the collective shadow. They can perceive the unacknowledged aspects of group dynamics, the hidden fears and unconscious motivations that drive surface conflicts. This shadow awareness allows them to address root causes rather than mere symptoms, to heal divisions at their source rather than simply managing their manifestations. The integration of this shadow awareness requires tremendous psychological maturity. The natural sovereign must acknowledge and work with the dark aspects of power itself, its tendency to corrupt, to isolate, to generate envy and resentment in others. They must develop what might be called a conscious relationship with their own capacity for destruction, learning to channel these energies toward creative transformation rather than allowing them to manifest in unconscious destructiveness. This shadow work often involves a profound encounter with what Jung termed the wounded healer archetype, The natural sovereign discovers that their capacity to heal others' divisions often emerges from their own experience of internal conflict and resolution. They learn to lead not from a position of imagined perfection but from authentic engagement with the full spectrum of human experience, including its most difficult and painful aspects. The authority that flows from this integrated approach to leadership carries a quality of authenticity that cannot be fabricated or imitated. Others sense in the natural sovereign someone who has genuinely wrestled with the fundamental challenges of human existence and emerged not unscathed, but somehow strengthened by the encounter. This battle-tested wisdom creates a form of credibility that formal credentials or external achievements could never establish. Yet the sovereign archetype also contains within itself the seeds of its own transcendence. Truly effective natural leaders work constantly toward their own obsolescence, seeking to awaken in others the very qualities of leadership that they themselves embody. They understand that their ultimate success lies not in maintaining their position of authority, but in creating conditions where such centralized leadership becomes unnecessary. This paradoxical goal to lead others toward their own leadership requires a profound evolution in consciousness. The natural sovereign must learn to hold their archetypal role lightly, wearing their authority like a garment that can be put on or taken off as circumstances require. They must develop the capacity to step forward when leadership is needed and step back when others are ready to carry the load. In the deepest analysis, the sovereign archetype represents consciousness itself in its function as the organizing principle of psychological life. Just as consciousness brings order to the chaos of unconscious contents, the natural sovereign brings coherence to the confusion of collective life. They serve as a kind of psychological lighthouse, providing a stable reference point around which others can orient themselves in times of uncertainty or transition. This lighthouse function operates not through the imposition of external order, but through the embodiment of internal order. The natural sovereign's primary tool is not command, but example. Not coercion but inspiration. They lead by becoming what they wish to see in others, by incarnating the qualities that they seek to evoke in those around them. The quiet dominance that flows from archetypal leadership thus represents power in its highest form, not the domination of the weak by the strong, but the natural ordering that emerges when consciousness assumes its proper relationship to the unconscious forces from which it arises. It is dominance without violence, authority without oppression, leadership without the diminishment of followers. In recognizing and accepting their archetypal role, natural sovereigns do not achieve mastery over others, but discover their own deepest service to the collective evolution of consciousness itself. They become vessels through which the ancient wisdom of right relationship can enter the world, bridges across which the timeless principles of authentic authority can travel into contemporary circumstances. This is perhaps the greatest gift that the sovereign archetype offers to our time, not another model of hierarchical control, but a living demonstration of how true authority emerges from the marriage of personal authenticity and transpersonal service. In embodying this archetypal pattern, natural leaders show us what becomes possible when the ego's desperate grasping for power gives way to the self's patient willingness to serve the greater becoming of which we are all a part. Beyond the realm of spoken words and deliberate actions, beyond the careful strategies of the conscious mind and the calculated gestures of social performance, there exists a more fundamental dimension of human influence, the invisible signature of pure presence that each being carries like an energetic fingerprint, unique and unmistakable. This is the realm where the quietly dominant achieve their most profound mastery, not through the manipulation of external circumstances, but through the conscious cultivation and direction of the very life force that animates their being. Every human creature moves through the world wrapped in an invisible atmosphere of their own making, a field of energy that speaks volumes before the first word is uttered, that communicates the essential quality of their being with a directness that bypasses the rational mind entirely. Most remain unconscious of this energetic dimension, broadcasting their internal states haphazardly like untrained radio operators, filling the airwaves with static and confusion. But the quietly dominant have learned to become conscious artists of their own presence, sculptors of the invisible medium through which all authentic influence flows. This energetic presence operates according to laws more ancient than language, more fundamental than thought. It is the medium through which mother and child first communicate, the channel through which lovers recognize their destiny in each other's eyes, the invisible bridge across which all genuine human connection travels. Jung understood this dimension well, recognizing in it the manifestation of what he called the transcendent function, the mysterious capacity of the psyche to influence and be influenced by forces that exist beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness. The mastery of energetic presence begins with a profound act of self-ownership, the courage to take full responsibility for the quality of consciousness that one brings into every moment and every encounter. This is not the superficial self-improvement of positive thinking or the manufactured enthusiasm of motivational techniques, but the deep work of internal alchemy, the patient transformation of lead into gold, that occurs when authentic self-development meets unwavering commitment to truth. Watch those who have achieved this mastery as they enter a room. Something shifts in the very atmosphere before they speak, before they move. Sometimes even before others consciously register their arrival. The energetic field around them carries information that the unconscious mind of every person present receives and processes instantly, messages of safety or threat, strength or weakness, authenticity or deception, chaos or order. Their presence speaks a language older than words, more reliable than promises, more persuasive than the most eloquent arguments. This energetic communication occurs through channels that science is only beginning to understand, but that human beings have recognized and responded to for millennia. It manifests in countless subtle ways: the quality of breath, the depth of gaze, the degree of relaxation or tension in the musculature, the rhythm of movement, the degree of presence or absence in the moment. All of these physical markers reflect and transmit the underlying psychological and spiritual condition of the being, creating an invisible but powerfully felt signature that others cannot help but receive. The quietly dominant understand that this energetic presence is not fixed but fluid, not a static characteristic but a dynamic expression of their ongoing relationship with themselves and with life itself. They have learned to consciously influence this presence not through external technique, but through internal transformation, recognizing that authentic presence can only emerge from authentic being, that genuine influence flows only from genuine development. This process of energetic development often requires a fundamental reordering of priorities, a shift from the external focus that characterizes most human effort to an internal focus that may appear, to the uninitiated, like a kind of magnificent selfishness. The aspiring master of presence must learn to value their own energetic integrity above social approval, their own internal harmony above external achievements, their own psychological wholeness above the fragmented demands of a fragmented world. Yet this apparent selfishness reveals itself in time as the deepest form of service. For when a human being achieves genuine energetic coherence, when their thoughts, emotions, intentions, and actions align in harmonious integration, they become a blessing to everyone they encounter. Their very presence begins to evoke in others the possibility of similar integration, similar wholeness, similar peace. The energetic field that surrounds such a being carries the quality that Jung recognized as numinous, touched by something sacred, charged with transformative potential. Others enter this field like travelers entering a cathedral, sensing immediately that they have moved into space where different laws apply, where the ordinary concerns of ego-driven existence give way to something more spacious, more generous, more fundamentally alive. This numinous quality of presence cannot be manufactured through technique or willpower. It emerges naturally from what the alchemists called the opus contra naturam, the work against nature that paradoxically leads to a more profound alignment with nature's deepest principles. It is the fruit of long labor in the vineyards of consciousness, the harvest of years spent in patient cultivation of the soul's garden, the flowering of sustained commitment to the integration of all that one is. The quietly dominant who have achieved this mastery understand that their energetic presence is simultaneously their most personal and most impersonal possession. It emerges from the unique constellation of their individual psychology, the particular pattern of their wounds and gifts, the specific quality of their relationship with the mysteries of existence, yet it also connects them to something universal, something that transcends the boundaries of personal identity and speaks to the deepest longings of human consciousness. This paradoxical quality, simultaneously personal and impersonal, creates a form of presence that others find mysteriously compelling. They sense in it both the authenticity of genuine individual development and the authority of connection to something greater than individuality. It is presence that has been earned through struggle, but has transcended the need to defend itself, authority that has been won through surrender rather than conquest. The cultivation of such presence requires what might be called conscious breathing, not merely the mechanical act of respiration, but the full embrace of the life force as it moves through the being moment by moment. The masters of energetic presence have learned to breathe not just with their lungs but with their entire being, allowing the breath to carry away tension and resistance while drawing in vitality and openness. Their breathing becomes a form of continuous meditation, a moment-to-moment practice of alignment with the fundamental rhythm of existence. This conscious relationship with breath creates a quality of groundedness that others find deeply reassuring. In a world where most people seem to float anxiously above the solid earth of their own being, driven by the restless winds of desire and fear, the presence of someone who has learned to breathe themselves into full embodiment offers a profound gift of stability. Others are drawn to this groundedness like iron filings to a magnet, finding in it the anchor that they have been seeking without knowing what they sought. The energetic mastery of the quietly dominant also involves a sophisticated understanding of boundaries, not the rigid walls that fear erects to protect itself, but the permeable membranes that allow for authentic exchange while maintaining energetic integrity. They have learned to be simultaneously open and protected, receptive and discriminating, accessible and sovereign. This boundary mastery allows them to engage fully with others without being depleted by the encounter, to offer genuine empathy without absorbing others' emotional states as their own. This boundary wisdom often manifests as an uncanny ability to remain calm in the midst of others' storms, centered in the midst of chaos, clear in the midst of confusion. Their energetic field becomes a sanctuary of peace that others can enter when they need refuge from the turbulence of their own minds. This sanctuary quality is not indifference or detachment, but the profound compassion that can only emerge from one who has learned to hold space for the full spectrum of human experience without being overwhelmed by it. The quietly dominant understand that energetic presence operates through principles of resonance and entrainment, rather than force or manipulation. Just as a tuning fork struck in one part of a room will cause another tuning fork tuned to the same frequency to begin vibrating in sympathy, a being who has achieved energetic coherence naturally evokes similar coherence in those around them. Others find themselves mysteriously calmed by proximity to such presence, their own nervous systems gradually attuning to the deeper rhythm that the master embodies. This entrainment effect operates beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, creating influence that feels entirely natural and non-invasive to those who experience it. Unlike charismatic manipulation, which creates dependency and diminishes the autonomy of others, energetic presence enhances the capacity of others to access their own inner resources. It does not control, but rather catalyzes, not dominates, but liberates, not diminishes, but amplifies the authentic being of all who come within its sphere. The development of such presence requires a profound commitment to truth in all its dimensions, not merely intellectual honesty, but emotional authenticity, not just accurate perception, but embodied integrity. The quietly dominant master of presence has learned to align their energetic expression with their deepest values, their external presence with their internal reality, their momentary state with their ultimate commitment. This alignment creates a quality of presence that rings true at every level, like a bell cast from pure metal that produces a clear, sustained tone when struck. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of energetic mastery lies in its capacity for conscious modulation. The true master can adapt the quality of their presence to serve the needs of each moment and each encounter. They can intensify their field when strength is needed, soften it when gentleness serves, expand it when leadership is called for, contract it when others need space to find their own center. This flexibility emerges not from technique but from deep attunement to the subtle requirements of each situation. In the final analysis, the mastery of energetic presence represents the flowering of human potential in its most refined form. It is the fruit of the individuation process carried to its natural conclusion, the harvest of sustained commitment to psychological and spiritual development. Those who achieve this mastery discover that they have become instruments through which the deeper intelligence of existence can work, vessels through which the healing and transformative power of consciousness itself can flow into a world hungry for authentic presence. Their quiet dominance emerges not from what they do, but from what they have become, not from their actions, but from their being, not from their efforts to influence others, but from their commitment to influence themselves. In mastering the art of conscious presence, they have touched something eternal within the temporal realm of human interaction, something infinite within the finite boundaries of individual existence. They have become bridges between the world of ordinary consciousness and the deeper realms where true authority dwells in patient silence, waiting to bless all who have the courage to receive it. In the end, all paths of authentic power lead to this single revelation that true dominance is not the conquest of others, but the sovereignty of self, not the subjugation of external forces, but the integration of internal kingdoms, not the accumulation of worldly authority, but the flowering of that deepest authority, which emerges when a human being becomes at last wholly themselves. This is the great secret that the quietly dominant have discovered in their long journey through the labyrinth of consciousness, that external influence is always and only the natural overflow of internal mastery, that others defer not to our will but to our being, that leadership is not something we do, but something we become when we have done the patient work of individuation that Jung recognized as the central task of human existence. The return to sovereign self is both the beginning and the end of all genuine power, the alpha and omega of authentic influence. It is the recognition that we have spent most of our lives seeking in the outer world what can only be found in the inner realm, pursuing in the domain of others' approval what can only be achieved through our own self-acceptance, hunting in the wilderness of external validation for the treasure that lies buried in the depths of our own being. This sovereign self is not the inflated ego that psychology has taught us to mistrust, nor the grandiose persona that seeks to impress through performance and pretense. It is something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful, the integrated totality of all that we are, shadow and light woven together in the golden tapestry of complete self-acceptance, wound and gift united in the alchemical marriage of conscious wholeness. Jung understood that individuation, the process by which one becomes who they truly are, represents the highest achievement available to human consciousness. It is the work of a lifetime, the opus magnum of psychological development, the great work that transforms the raw ore of personality into the refined gold of authentic selfhood. Those who complete this work or approach its completion discover that they have become kings and queens of their own psychic realm, sovereign rulers of the only territory that ultimately matters, the landscape of their own soul. This internal sovereignty manifests in countless ways, each one a facet of the diamond of integrated consciousness. The sovereign self no longer seeks external permission to be who they are, no longer requires others' approval to validate their existence, no longer depends on circumstances to determine their inner weather. They have found within themselves the source of their own authority, the wellspring of their own worth, the foundation of their own peace. Yet this sovereignty is not the cold isolation of the hermit who withdraws from human contact, nor the brittle independence of those who fear intimacy's demands. It is the warm autonomy of one who has learned to love themselves so completely that they overflow naturally into love for others, who has achieved such internal fullness that they give not from need but from abundance, who has become so whole within themselves that they can afford to be vulnerable in relationship without losing their essential center. The sovereign self has made peace with their shadow, those aspects of personality that the ego would prefer to disown. They have learned that wholeness requires the integration of all aspects of their being, not merely the socially acceptable ones. In embracing their darkness as well as their light, their weakness as well as their strength, their foolishness as well as their wisdom, they have achieved the psychological completeness that makes genuine authority possible. This integration of shadow creates a profound authenticity that others cannot help but recognize and respect. The sovereign self does not pretend to be perfect, but presents themselves as complete in their imperfection, whole in their brokenness, powerful in their humility. This paradoxical presentation carries tremendous authority because it reflects the actual human condition, rather than some idealized version of it. The journey to sovereignty often requires what the mystics have called the dark night of the soul, a period of profound disillusionment with external sources of meaning and identity. The future sovereign must experience the collapse of all false foundations, the stripping away of all borrowed identities, the dissolution of all external supports, until they stand naked before the mystery of their own existence with nothing left but the irreducible core of their being. This existential nakedness is terrifying for the ego, which has spent years constructing elaborate defenses against the vulnerability of authentic existence. Yet it is precisely this terror that must be faced and transcended if true sovereignty is to emerge. For only when we have lost everything that we thought we were can we discover who we actually are beneath all the accumulated layers of conditioning, expectation, and defensive adaptation. The sovereign self that emerges from this crucible of dissolution carries within themselves an unshakable centeredness that no external circumstance can disturb. They have touched the bedrock of their own being and found it solid beyond all shaking. They have discovered the eternal within themselves and can therefore afford to engage fully with the temporal without being swept away by its turbulence. This centeredness manifests as what might be called conscious presence, the capacity to remain fully embodied in each moment while maintaining awareness of the larger context within which each moment unfolds. The sovereign self does not lose themselves in the drama of immediate circumstances, but engages with that drama from a place of fundamental stability, like an actor who becomes completely absorbed in their role while never forgetting that they are playing a part in a larger story. From this centered presence flows the natural authority that others recognize as quietly dominance. It is not authority that must be claimed or defended, but authority that simply is, as natural and undeniable as the authority of the sun to give light or the mountain to stand firm against the wind. Others sense in the sovereign self, someone who has achieved what they themselves long for, the peace of complete self-acceptance, the strength of integrated wholeness, the freedom that comes from having nothing left to prove. The sovereign self wields power differently than those who seek dominance from ego's fragmented perspective. Their power is not power over others, but power with others, not the diminishment of others' agency, but its enhancement, not the suppression of others' authority, but its awakening. They lead by modeling what becomes possible when a human being assumes complete responsibility for their own development, and thereby becomes a gift to everyone they encounter. This modeling function represents perhaps the highest form of influence available to human consciousness. The sovereign self teaches not through preaching but through being, influences not through manipulation but through inspiration, leads not through control but through example. Their very existence becomes a demonstration of human potential fulfilled, a living proof that the individuation process can reach completion, that wholeness is not merely an abstract ideal but an achievable reality. Yet, the sovereign self never loses sight of their fundamental humanity. They have not transcended the human condition, but have embraced it so completely that they have discovered the divine within it. They are not superhuman but fully human, not beyond suffering but conscious within it, not exempt from life's difficulties but responsive rather than reactive to its challenges. This full acceptance of the human condition creates a profound compassion that extends naturally to all other beings struggling with the same fundamental challenges. The sovereign self sees in others not competitors to be defeated or resources to be exploited, but fellow travelers on the path of conscious evolution, each deserving of the same compassion they have learned to extend to themselves. This compassion is not the sentimental sympathy of those who have never faced their own darkness, but the clear-eyed understanding of those who have wrestled with every demon in their own psyche and emerged victorious, not through conquest, but through integration. They can meet others' shadow with equanimity because they have made peace with their own, can hold space for others' pain because they have learned to bear their own with dignity. The authority that flows from such integrated compassion is perhaps the most powerful form of quiet dominance possible. It is dominance that serves rather than exploits, that elevates rather than diminishes, that liberates rather than controls. Others defer to such authority, not because they are being dominated, but because they recognize in it the fulfillment of their own deepest aspirations. The sovereign self understands that their primary responsibility is not to others, but to the ongoing process of individuation itself. They serve the evolution of consciousness by becoming as conscious as possible, contribute to the healing of the world by becoming as whole as possible, advance the cause of human development by developing themselves as fully as possible. This apparent selfishness reveals itself as the deepest form of service. For every human being who achieves sovereignty becomes a beacon of possibility for all others. Yet, true sovereignty never becomes static or complacent. The sovereign self continues to grow, to learn, to evolve, understanding that individuation is not a destination but a process, not an achievement but a way of being. They remain open to new learning, receptive to feedback, willing to acknowledge when they have made mistakes or fallen short of their own standards. This ongoing humility keeps their sovereignty fresh and alive rather than rigid and defensive. In the end, the return to sovereign self represents the fulfillment of human potential in its most complete form. It is what Jung called the realization of the self, the deeper center of personality that transcends while including the ego, that connects the individual to the universal while maintaining their unique identity, that bridges the temporal and eternal aspects of existence. Those who achieve this sovereignty discover that they have become what they have always been seeking in others, their own source of strength, their own fountain of wisdom, their own wellspring of love. They no longer need to seek power because they have found it within themselves, no longer need to pursue influence because it flows naturally from their being, no longer need to strive for dominance because they have achieved the only dominance that ultimately matters, mastery of their own consciousness. This is the great gift that the quietly dominant offer to a world still largely unconscious of its own potential, the living demonstration that sovereignty is possible, that wholeness can be achieved, that the individuation process can reach completion. In becoming kings and queens of their own psychic realm, they show others what becomes possible when human beings accept full responsibility for their own development, and thereby become instruments through which consciousness itself can evolve toward ever greater integration, ever deeper wisdom, ever more complete love. Their quiet dominance thus serves not their own aggrandizement, but the larger purpose of consciousness itself, to know itself ever more completely through the vehicle of individual human development. In achieving sovereignty over themselves, they have become servants of the greatest sovereign of all, the self, that Jung recognized as the organizing principle of the entire psyche. The God image within that seeks to manifest through human consciousness when it has been refined sufficiently to hold such divine presence. This is dominance in its highest form, not the petty tyranny of ego over ego, but the benevolent rule of consciousness over unconsciousness, not the oppression of the weak by the strong, but the natural leadership of the whole over the fragmented, not the conquest of others, but the victory of authentic being over the forces of fragmentation and fear that keep most of humanity trapped in suffering. In returning to their sovereign self, the quietly dominant complete the circle of all genuine spiritual teaching. They become who they have always been beneath all the accumulated layers of conditioning and defense, and in this becoming they offer to all who encounter them the most precious gift possible, the recognition of their own innate sovereignty, their own potential for wholeness, their own capacity to become kings and queens of their own consciousness. In the deepest chambers of the psyche, where the soul keeps its most sacred secrets, There exists a presence that speaks without words, commands without force, and leads without demanding to be followed. This is the realm of energetic mastery, where the quietly dominant have learned to wield the most subtle yet profound influence available to human consciousness, the pure emanation of their being itself. Like the sun that warms without effort, like the mountain that stands without proclamation, like the deep well that draws the thirsty without calling out, the mastery of energetic presence represents the apex of inner development. It is here, in this invisible territory between souls, that true power reveals its most refined expression. For those who have walked the long path of individuation, who have descended into their own depths and emerged transformed, discover that their very presence has become a force of nature, not manufactured or contrived, but as natural and inevitable as breath itself. Jung understood this phenomenon deeply when he wrote of the numinous quality that surrounds certain individuals, that magnetic field of psychological wholeness that draws others like pilgrims to a sacred shrine. These beings have not learned tricks of manipulation or techniques of control. Rather, they have undergone the profound alchemy of self-transformation, and their energy field now carries the signature of this inner work. They have become living transmitters of consciousness, their presence itself a teaching, their being a benediction. Consider the difference between the performer on stage who commands attention through volume and spectacle, and the master who enters a room and immediately shifts its entire atmosphere simply by being present. The first works from the outside in, manufacturing effect through external means. The second works from the inside out, their transformed consciousness naturally radiating qualities that others recognize and respond to at the deepest levels of their being. This is not charisma in the common sense that often hollow magnetism of the persona, but rather the authentic power of the individuated self expressing through the vehicle of human presence. This energetic mastery manifests first as a quality of stillness, a centered calm that others can feel even before conscious recognition occurs. It is as if these beings carry within themselves an eye of the storm, a point of absolute stability around which the chaos of ordinary consciousness can organize itself. Those in their presence often report feeling simultaneously relaxed and alert, as if some deeper part of themselves has recognized a safe harbor in the tempest of modern existence. This is not the imposed quiet of suppression, but the natural silence that emerges when inner conflicts have been resolved, when the warring factions of the psyche have found their rightful places in the hierarchy of being. From this foundation of inner stillness arises what Jung called the transcendent function, that miraculous capacity to hold opposites in creative tension, without being torn apart by them. The energetically masterful presence embodies this principle, becoming a living example of how consciousness can integrate contradictions rather than be destroyed by them. Others sense this integration unconsciously and are drawn to it, like plants turning toward the light. In a world fragmented by false choices and artificial polarities, such beings represent the possibility of wholeness, the hope that division can be healed and unity restored. The second quality of masterful presence is what we might call energetic boundaries, not walls built in defense, but natural parameters that define the sacred space of the individual soul. These boundaries are felt rather than seen, communicated through the subtle language of energy, rather than the crude grammar of words. Those who encounter such presence instinctively sense where they are welcomed and where they are not, what is appropriate and what violates the natural order of relationship. There is no harsh rejection, no aggressive pushback, merely the gentle but unmistakable communication of limits that serve the highest good of all involved. This mastery of boundaries represents one of the most sophisticated achievements of psychological development. It requires the individual to have traveled deep enough into their own unconscious to know where they end and others begin, to have established sovereignty over their own psychic territory before attempting to navigate the complex realm of interpersonal energy. Like a master gardener who knows exactly how much water each plant needs, when to provide support and when to allow struggle, these beings have learned to calibrate their energetic output to serve authentic relationship rather than ego gratification. The third dimension of energetic mastery manifests as what the alchemists called the subtile, that refined quality of consciousness that can penetrate surfaces and touch the essential nature of whatever it encounters. Those who have developed this capacity carry within their presence a quality of seeing that goes beyond the merely visual, a knowing that transcends intellectual understanding. Others feel truly witnessed in their presence, not just observed or analyzed, but recognized at the level of soul. This profound seeing, when wielded with wisdom and compassion, becomes a healing force that helps others remember their own essential nature. Yet, this gift of deep seeing must be balanced with what Jung recognized as the importance of not knowing, of maintaining that beginner's mind that allows each encounter to be fresh and unpredictable. The masterful presence holds both the capacity for profound insight and the humility to be surprised, to discover something new even in familiar territory. This paradoxical combination of wisdom and innocence creates an energy field that is both grounding and enlivening, both reassuring and mysteriously opening. As consciousness deepens through the process of individuation, the energy field begins to carry what we might call archetypal qualities, not the rigid masks of persona, but the living expressions of universal patterns that exist within the collective unconscious. The mature individual becomes a conduit through which archetypal energies can flow in service of the greater wholeness. At one moment they might embody the wise elder, offering counsel born of hard-won experience. At another, they might channel the innocent child, bringing fresh wonder to stale situations. They might manifest the warrior when protection is needed, the lover when hearts require opening, the magician when transformation calls. This archetypal fluidity represents one of the highest achievements of psychological development, requiring the ego to become transparent enough to allow deeper forces to express through it, while maintaining enough structure to prevent chaos or possession. Those who achieve this mastery become living bridges between the personal and the transpersonal, the human and the divine, the known and the unknowable. Their presence itself becomes a teaching about the deeper possibilities of human consciousness. The fourth quality of energetic mastery manifests as what might be called generative presence, the capacity to create psychological space in which others can discover and express their own authentic nature, rather than filling the air with their own energy. These beings know how to create receptive fields that invite emergence, like the silence between musical notes that allows melody to exist, like the empty canvas that makes painting possible. Their presence provides the spaciousness necessary for authentic self-expression to unfold. This generative quality requires a profound level of egoic development, for it demands that the individual be secure enough in their own identity to allow others to shine without feeling diminished. It represents the flowering of what Jung called the transcendent function applied to relationship, the capacity to hold space for another's process without needing to direct or control it. Those who have developed this gift often find that others do their best thinking, feeling, and creating in their presence, as if some deeper intelligence is activated by the quality of attention they provide. The mastery of energetic presence also manifests through what we might call the alchemy of attention, the understanding that consciousness itself is a creative force that participates in shaping reality through the quality of its engagement. Those who have developed this mastery recognize that how they attend to something is as important as what they attend to, that the quality of their awareness itself becomes a factor in whatever situation they encounter. They have learned to wield attention like a master craftsperson wields their tools with precision, purpose, and profound respect for the materials they work with. This alchemical quality of attention operates through several distinct modes, each appropriate to different circumstances and needs. There is the focused attention that can penetrate to the heart of complex problems, cutting through confusion and distraction to illuminate essential truths. There is the diffuse attention that can sense patterns and possibilities, holding peripheral awareness while maintaining central focus. There is the compassionate attention that creates healing through the simple act of witnessed presence, and there is the mysterious quality that Jung called the thinking heart, a mode of consciousness that integrates intellectual understanding with emotional wisdom and intuitive knowing. As the individual continues to develop energetic mastery, they begin to discover what might be called the frequency of authenticity, that particular vibrational quality that emerges when one's outer expression perfectly aligns with one's inner truth. This is not the constructed authenticity of the ego that tries to be real, but the natural authenticity that emerges when all pretense has been dropped and the genuine self is allowed to express without interference. Others recognize this frequency instantly, though often unconsciously, and respond to it with trust and openness that surprises even them. This authentic frequency cannot be manufactured or imitated, for it arises only from genuine self-knowledge and self-acceptance. It carries within it the signature of the individual's unique journey, their particular constellation of wounds transformed into wisdom, their specific gifts offered in service of the greater wholeness. Like a musical note that resonates at exactly the right pitch, this authentic presence creates harmony rather than discord in the symphony of human relationship. The energetically masterful presence also embodies what the mystics have long recognized as the power of impersonal love, that quality of caring that extends beyond personal preference or attachment to embrace the essential worth of all life. This is not the romantic love of projection, nor the familial love of biology, nor even the friendship love of affinity, but rather the universal love that recognizes the sacred in whatever form it takes. Those who embody this quality create fields of acceptance and appreciation that allow others to relax their defenses and remember their own essential goodness. Yet this impersonal love must be balanced with what Jung called the reality of evil, the recognition that not all impulses serve life and growth, that sometimes loving action requires the setting of firm boundaries or even active resistance to destructive forces. The masterful presence learns to distinguish between the person and their behavior, loving the former while clearly opposing the latter when necessary. This discrimination represents one of the most sophisticated achievements of psychological development, requiring both the wisdom to see clearly and the courage to act appropriately. As consciousness continues to evolve through the individuation process, the energy field begins to carry what we might call temporal depth, the capacity to be fully present in the eternal now while simultaneously drawing upon the wisdom of the past and remaining open to the possibilities of the future. This temporal mastery allows such beings to respond to each moment with both immediacy and perspective, bringing the appropriate resources to bear without being trapped by historical patterns or future anxieties. This temporal depth manifests practically as the ability to sense the kairos within chronos, those special moments when conditions are exactly right for transformation, when the ordinary flow of time opens to reveal its deeper patterns and purposes. Those who have developed this sensitivity often seem to have perfect timing, not through calculation or manipulation, but through attunement to the natural rhythms of emergence and decay, expansion and contraction, speaking and silence. The mastery of energetic presence ultimately reveals itself as participation in what Jung called the unused mundus, the unified reality that underlies the apparent separation between inner and outer, self and other, consciousness and matter. Those who achieve this level of development discover that their individual energy field is actually a unique expression of the greater energy field that encompasses all existence. They become conscious participants in the ongoing creation of reality, their presence itself a form of prayer, their being a blessing upon the world. This participation in the greater wholeness does not diminish their individuality, but rather reveals its true purpose and meaning. Like instruments in a cosmic orchestra, they discover that their unique voice contributes to a symphony far greater than any single melody, that their particular frequency adds irreplaceable richness to the overall harmony of existence. Their energetic mastery becomes a gift, not just to those immediately around them, but to the collective consciousness of humanity itself. In the deepest recognition of energetic mastery, the individual comes to understand that presence is not something they possess or wield, but something they are. Their years of inner work have not added anything to their essential nature, but rather removed everything that was blocking its natural expression. Like sculptors who liberate the figure hidden within the stone, they have carved away the false identifications and limiting beliefs that prevented their authentic being from shining forth. This is the ultimate paradox of energetic mastery, that its achievement requires the abandonment of all effort to achieve it. In surrendering the ego's desire to be impressive, influential, or important, the individual creates space for something far more powerful to emerge: the natural authority of consciousness itself, the inevitable influence of truth, embodied, the magnetic presence of a being who has finally come home to themselves and in doing so, created a home for others to discover their own authentic nature. The mastery of energetic presence thus represents not the end of the journey, but its flowering into service. Having achieved sovereignty over their own psychic realm, these beings naturally become sources of guidance and inspiration for others, still walking the path toward wholeness. Their presence itself becomes a teaching, their being a beacon that illuminates the way for those ready to undertake their own journey of transformation and awakening. In the end, all paths of power lead to a single destination: the throne room of one's own soul, where the only crown that matters is fashioned from self-knowledge, and the only subjects worthy of rule are the untamed forces of one's own unconscious mind. This is the ultimate revelation that awaits those who have walked the long road of individuation, that quiet dominance was never about mastering others, but about achieving complete sovereignty over the vast, mysterious kingdom of the self. Jung understood this profound truth when he spoke of the self with a capital S, that archetype of wholeness that represents not the ego's small ambitions, but consciousness in its most complete and integrated form. The journey toward this sovereign self is the hero's journey in its most essential expression, requiring the individual to descend into the darkest regions of their own psyche, face the dragon of their own shadow, and emerge transformed with the treasure of authentic selfhood. This is dominance in its highest and most sacred form, not the domination of the weak by the strong, but the natural leadership that flows from psychological completeness. The sovereign self emerges only after the ego has learned its proper place in the hierarchy of consciousness. For years, perhaps decades, the developing individual has struggled with the ego's desperate attempts to maintain control, to be the center of the psychic universe, to bend reality to its limited understanding and narrow desires. This struggle is necessary and inevitable, for the ego must be strong enough to contain the forces it will eventually learn to serve. But sovereignty comes only when the ego finally surrenders its grandiose ambitions and accepts its role as faithful servant to the deeper self. This surrender represents one of the most paradoxical achievements in human development. The ego must become strong enough to choose its own subordination, mature enough to recognize that its greatest fulfillment lies not in ruling, but in serving something greater than itself. Like a proud general who finally kneels before the true king, the ego discovers that its power is magnified rather than diminished when it aligns with the authentic hierarchy of consciousness. This is the great enantiodromia of psychological development, where the ego's attempt to be everything transforms into its willingness to be precisely what it was meant to be. The sovereign self manifests first as what we might call ontological security, a deep, unshakable knowing of one's own reality that cannot be threatened by external circumstances or the opinions of others. This security does not arise from defensive armor or protective strategies, but from the profound recognition of one's essential nature as consciousness itself. Those who have achieved this level of development rest in an identity that transcends all roles, relationships, and circumstances. They know themselves as the witness behind all experience, the space in which all phenomena arise and pass away. This ontological security creates what Jung recognized as the foundation of all genuine authority, the capacity to remain centered and coherent, regardless of external pressures or internal conflicts. Others sense this quality immediately and respond to it with a natural deference that has nothing to do with fear or manipulation. It is as if they recognize at some deep level of their being that they are in the presence of someone who has solved the fundamental riddle of existence: how to be fully human while remaining connected to something greater than the merely personal. From this foundation of inner security emerges what we might call archetypal authority, the natural right to speak and act, that comes from having integrated the deeper patterns of consciousness that govern human existence. The sovereign individual has journeyed through the landscape of their own psyche and discovered there the same archetypal forces that have shaped human civilization since the beginning of time. They carry within themselves the wisdom of the ancient patterns, not as abstract knowledge but as lived experience, not as concepts but as embodied reality. This archetypal authority manifests differently in each individual, depending on their particular constellation of gifts and their unique role in the greater wholeness. Some embody the authority of the wise elder, speaking truths born of long experience and hard-won wisdom. Others carry the authority of the creative artist, opening doorways to new possibilities and unexplored dimensions of human potential. Still others manifest the authority of the healer, offering their presence as balm for wounds that cannot be touched by conventional medicine. Each expresses their sovereignty through their particular gifts, but all share the common foundation of having integrated the deeper forces of consciousness. The sovereign self also embodies what might be called moral gravity, a natural ethical orientation that draws others toward higher principles and nobler possibilities. This is not the imposed morality of rules and regulations, nor the borrowed ethics of religious or cultural authorities, but the organic morality that emerges from deep self-knowledge and genuine care for the well-being of all life. Those who have achieved sovereignty have discovered that their own deepest nature is inherently aligned with what serves the greater good, that their individual fulfillment naturally contributes to the collective healing. This moral gravity operates through what Jung called the transcendent function applied to ethical decision-making, the capacity to find creative solutions that honor apparently conflicting values and serve multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The sovereign individual has learned to navigate the complex terrain of human relationships without losing their center, to stand for principles without becoming rigid, to exercise power without becoming corrupted by it. They have discovered that true strength lies not in the ability to impose one's will but in the capacity to find solutions that serve everyone involved. As consciousness continues to evolve towards sovereignty, the individual begins to embody what the alchemists called the philosopher's stone, that mysterious substance capable of transforming base metals into gold. In psychological terms, this represents the capacity to transform suffering into wisdom, conflict into creativity, and limitation into opportunity. The sovereign self becomes a natural alchemist, constantly transmuting the raw materials of experience into the refined gold of consciousness. Others are drawn to this transformative presence, sensing in it the possibility of their own transformation. This alchemical capacity manifests practically as the ability to find meaning and purpose in whatever circumstances arise, to discover the gift hidden within every challenge, to recognize the teaching embedded in every situation. The sovereign individual has learned to collaborate with fate rather than merely endure it, to participate consciously in the mysterious process by which the unconscious transforms itself into consciousness. They have become partners with the creative force of the universe, instruments through which evolution can accomplish its deepest purposes. The sovereignty of the integrated self also expresses itself through what we might call temporal mastery, the capacity to live fully in the present moment, while remaining connected to both the wisdom of the past and the possibilities of the future. This temporal integration allows such beings to respond to each situation with both immediacy and perspective, bringing the appropriate resources to bear without being trapped by historical patterns or future anxieties. They have learned to dance with time rather than being driven by it, to use its rhythms for creative purposes rather than being enslaved by its demand. This temporal mastery manifests as what Jung called synchronicity awareness, the recognition that meaningful coincidences are not random accidents, but expressions of the deeper patterns that connect all things. The sovereign individual has learned to read these patterns, to recognize when the universe is offering support or guidance, to align their actions with the subtle currents of meaning that flow beneath the surface of ordinary experience. They become conscious participants in the ongoing conversation between consciousness and cosmos, their lives themselves becoming meaningful expressions of the greater wholeness. As sovereignty deepens, the individual begins to embody what the mystics have long recognized as the paradox of personal impersonality, the capacity to be completely themselves, while simultaneously transcending all personal limitations. This is not the dissolution of individuality into some featureless absolute, but rather the discovery that authentic individuality can only be achieved through conscious participation in the universal. The sovereign self becomes a unique expression of something greater than itself, like a perfect crystal that reveals the fundamental structure of reality through its particular form. This paradoxical achievement requires what Jung called the integration of the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative tension without being torn apart by them. The sovereign individual has learned to be both human and divine, individual and universal, temporal and eternal. They have discovered that these apparent contradictions are actually complementary aspects of a deeper reality that can only be approached through paradox and lived through embodied wisdom. The sovereign self also manifests what we might call generative leadership, the capacity to create conditions in which others can discover and express their own authentic power. Rather than demanding followers or seeking to impose their vision on others, the sovereign individual creates spaces of possibility in which genuine creativity and authentic expression can flourish. They have learned that true power multiplies when it is shared, that authentic authority grows stronger when it empowers others rather than diminishing them. This generative quality expresses itself through what might be called the alchemy of inspiration, the mysterious capacity to awaken in others their own deepest potentials and highest aspirations. The sovereign presence carries within itself a quality of recognition that sees through surface appearances to the essential nobility that exists within every human being. This recognition, when communicated with skill and compassion, becomes a catalyst for transformation that helps others remember their own forgotten greatness. As the journey towards sovereignty continues, the individual begins to embody what the ancient traditions called the quality of the sage, that mysterious combination of wisdom and innocence, knowing and not knowing, that allows consciousness to remain fresh and creative even as it deepens in understanding. The sovereign self has learned to hold its accumulated wisdom lightly, to remain eternally curious about the mystery of existence, to approach each moment with both the maturity of experience and the wonder of a child encountering the world for the first time. This sage-like quality manifests as what Jung recognized as the importance of maintaining the beginner's mind, that openness to surprise and discovery that prevents wisdom from hardening into dogma. The sovereign individual has learned to trust their accumulated understanding while remaining open to new possibilities, to rely on their developed faculties while staying receptive to unexpected insights. They have discovered that true mastery includes the humility to continue learning, that genuine authority embraces the mystery of what remains unknown. The sovereignty of the integrated self ultimately reveals itself as participation in what Jung called the collective individuation, the process by which individual transformation contributes to the evolution of consciousness itself. Those who achieve personal sovereignty discover that their individual journey was always part of a larger journey, that their private struggles and victories serve purposes far greater than their personal fulfillment. They become conscious agents of evolution, their lives themselves becoming offerings to the ongoing development of human potential. This participation in collective individuation manifests as what we might call species service, the natural impulse to use one's gifts and achievements in service of the greater wholeness. The sovereign individual has discovered that their personal power finds its deepest fulfillment not in self-aggrandizement, but in contribution to the collective healing and awakening. They have learned that individual sovereignty and universal service are not opposites, but complementary aspects of the same fundamental reality. In the deepest recognition of sovereignty, the individual comes to understand that the kingdom they have spent so long trying to conquer was never separate from themselves. The throne they sought to claim was always waiting within their own consciousness. The subjects they hoped to rule were always the various aspects of their own psyche calling out for integration and leadership. The power they yearned to wield was always the natural authority of consciousness, recognizing itself in all its expressions. This is the ultimate revelation that awaits those who walk the path of individuation to its completion, that dominance and service are one, that ruling and surrendering are the same action viewed from different angles, that the highest power is identical with the deepest humility. The sovereign self rules over nothing and serves everything, commands by obeying the deeper laws of consciousness, leads by following the subtle guidance of the self that encompasses both individual and universal. The return to sovereign self represents not the end of development, but its flowering into wisdom. Having achieved mastery over their own psychic realm, these beings naturally become sources of guidance and blessing for others. Still walking the path toward wholeness, their sovereignty becomes a gift to the collective consciousness of humanity, their authority a beacon that illuminates the way for those ready to undertake their own journey of transformation and awakening. In this final flowering of quiet dominance, we discover that all external power was always a pale reflection of this internal sovereignty. All attempts to rule others were unconscious yearnings for this mastery of self. The quietly dominant have learned the supreme secret, that the only throne worth claiming is the one that exists within the kingdom of one's own consciousness, and from that seat of inner authority, all other forms of leadership become natural expressions of service to the greater wholeness that encompasses and transcends all individual ambition. This is dominance, transformed and redeemed. Power returned to its sacred function, authority restored to its proper purpose. This is the quiet revolution that changes the world, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple presence of consciousness that has finally come home to itself, and in doing so creates a home for all of life to flourish in its fullest expression.